The next bill on the calendar is Senate File 3852. Representative Nelson.
No, you said hand me the bill. The clerk will report the bill.
The clerk will report the bill. Apologize. Sorry, Senator.
Senate file number 3852. Number 7 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to labor, the second engrossment. Call on him and you say this.
Representative Nelson, before you explain your bill, do you want to put the House language into your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, that's before we get started, is insert the House language into the Senate bill.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Nelson M. moves to amend Senate file number 3852, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded as DEA 3947. Now he'll explain the amendment.
Representative Nelson, please explain your amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, this is just putting the House language into the Senate bill, replacing with our language. I ask for a yes vote.
The clerk will take the roll. No. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The motion passes. Representative Nelson, we'll get there.
Having to train somebody new in. Anyway, members, Senate File 3852 and House File 3947 is this year's labor bill. It is made up from bills we heard in committee this year from Reps. Greenman, Jordan, Berg, Moeller, Bonner, Kozlowski, Wolgamat, Hill, and myself. From the administration, we have the Dolly Construction Codes and Licensing Bill, which was House File 3947, and that's the vehicle, as well as the OSHA Technical Bill, the Labor Standards Technical Bill, and the Technical Housekeeping Changes to Labor Standards. There's a bill for Vice Chair Berg directing Dolly to come up with a poster for the captive audience bill that we passed last year. They can't do it unless we tell them to. From Rep. Greenman is a bill banning shadow non-competes agreements, closing a loophole in a bill that we passed last year on non-compete agreements. We included a bill from Chair Moeller from a constituent to use oral testing for the pre-drug hire to make it quicker to get new employees on the job. From Rep. Bonner, a bill to require salary ranges and job postings to close the wage gap that women experience when doing the same jobs and applying for the same jobs as men. Also from Vice Chair Berg, a bill that require an evacuation system for surgical smoke to protect both the surgical staff and the patients in the operating room. From Representative Kozlowski, we had changes to the minimum wage law, eliminating the sub-minimum wage for small employers, making the minimum wage standard the same across the state. From Rep. Wolgamat, I can't even say his name, Wolgamat, I can't even say his name today. Another bill that was brought to us from a constituent to clarify the licensing requirements for well contractors. And from Representative Hill, a bill that prevents employers from taking credit card fees out of employees' tips. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for discussion and amendments.
There's an amendment at the desk. Will the clerk report the amendment?
Bonner moves to amend Senate file number 3852, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A1.
Representative Bonner, please speak to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. In essence, what we're doing in the A1 is making sure that we conform with the changes in the Senate so that we save some time in conference committee.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion prevails. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Moeller moves to amend Senate file number 3852, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A12.
Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as Chair Nelson mentioned, this overall bill has a bill that came from one of my constituents, actually works at a warehouse where they do drug testing, and for pre-employment purposes wants to be able to use quick tests. Right now, workers have to go to a lab at their own time and transportation. And so being able to do this test quickly means that they can get started working right away. And if the test is either positive or inconclusive, then they would go to the lab process. As this bill was being heard in committee, we heard from some in the business community that they actually liked it and wanted it to be expanded to any employer-employee situations where they're doing drug tests, not just that pre-employment practice. And the Senate adopted that language already, and this is just to put that our bill in alignment with the Senate's on this provision. Thank you.
Discussion to the amendment. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion prevails. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Mecklen moves to amend Senate File Number 3852, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A3.
The member from, I forgot that I need to do this part. The member from Sherburne, Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the A3 amendment. So this amendment, the purpose behind this is there's been some different bills that have passed that impose additional requirements from the Department of Labor to do provide at their request records. All this amendment is simply asking is that the department make accommodation based on the number of records requested, rather than having these like set time frames, which it could be, one folder or it could be 4 cases of something. And particularly with some of our small businesses that are, they pretty much do, they're the hammer swinger, they're the record keeper, they're the bidder, they're the cleaner, they're everything. So I would hope that Chair Nelson would consider this a friendly amendment.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This was an amendment that was brought up in committee. The Department of Labor and Industry said that they don't need this is a not needed amendment, that they have the ability to give people extra time if it's needed. And so I would ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Mecklen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm very, it's unfortunate to hear that, as we kind of saw the similar thing happen with ESST as late as late October, early November. They were still trying to figure out how to train all the different employers of how to administer all these different rules and regulations. And now we're going to continuing to do these types of things and throw all these new curveballs at them. By the way, Mr. Speaker, I request a roll call.
15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Malcolm. The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Mecklen, for bringing this. Members, this is actually very, very simple, and it's a way of providing regulatory humility to our business owners across the state, our employers across this state, because when a request is made for information from small businesses, especially members, it is so prudent of us to have a policy in law that gives them the ability to respond based upon the need and based upon the request. It is absolutely possible that the request that is made for information is going to be something that brings a lot of time that small business owners, especially mom and pop shops, may not have. And so this is an important piece, important language for us to adopt and create a nice strong House position on this, but most specifically to help small business owners when they receive requests for this information from the Department of Labor and Industry. So I ask for all of your support. Frankly, this is something that is so simple that it would be great to have a nice green board on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Chair Nelson yield for a question?
He will.
Chair Nelson, can you let me know what current statutory time frame these businesses have to respond?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Myers. I believe it's in the bill. It's in law. It's 72 hours they have. But as I said in my earlier, that when Dolly talked about this in committee, they said they have the ability to let somebody go longer if they need be. And so that's why they said it's not necessary. They already have this. They already have the ability to do this.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chair continue to yield?
He will.
So you said you spoke to Dolly about allowing additional time. Did they go into detail about what they've seen for the amount of additional time they provide?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Myers. As I said, as they testified in committee, they already have the ability to do this. They don't need this in legislation. They already have the ability to do this.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chair yield for one more question?
He will.
In your conversations with the Department of Labor, did they talk to you with how many different types of businesses, sizes of businesses for requests like this?
Representative Nelson.
No, we didn't get into that.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, members, I think this is a prime example of things that we can do to bring a little bit of balance. You know, we understand that these complaints come forward, these allegations come forward. There's things that we can do to help support employers, employees, owners, operators, and to think that, you know, the Department of Labor didn't testify or we don't have information on speaking with large business owners, small business owners. As Representative Mecklen said, some of these people are wearing multiple hats. I think this is a reasonable amendment that, you know, will give those small businesses that maybe get a lot of requests, don't have an HR department, the required time that they need to respond. So I'd ask everybody to vote green.
Representative Nelson. Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's unfortunate that the Department of Labor feels that they can give whatever latitude of time that they deem appropriate, despite the fact I can foresee similar little scenarios or situations where perhaps a small business owner's out of town. All the information may be at his, or some of it may be at his accountant's office. He's not going to be back for a week, and yet they get 72 hours. Members, I encourage a green vote.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk recognize the member voting remotely?
Daniels.
Daniels votes yay.
Daniels votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. Representative Anderson votes aye.
So there'll be 60 ayes and... Is it still 60 or is it 61? It's 61, yeah. I'm just, yep, you're right, 61.
Being 61 ayes and 69 nays, the amendment does not prevail. There's an amendment at the desk.
Mecklen moves to amend Senate File Number 3852. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
The member from, I already forgot where you're from, Representative Mecklen. Sherburne, Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the A10. So this simply would make it so a license would not be required to buy solvent-based paint. And I find that when I heard about this bill originally floating about, I thought I had never heard anything quite so unique. And then uniquely, even beyond that, constituents started emailing me about this, and I first said, it can't be. But it was there. So this is simply an amendment to prohibit the requirement of a license to buy solvent-based paint.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, there was a bill that was introduced dealing with that about licensing and getting training for painters about using solvents, but that is not in this bill. There's nothing about that in this bill. That bill has not been heard in committee and it's still being worked on. There's a lot of things that got to be worked out. I agree that it's maybe a little ridiculous. On one hand, to only have painters have to be trained. We go through the painters to have to be trained to do this because there's all sorts of trades, from carpet layers to carpenters to pile drivers who are driving the pilings out across the street. All these different trades use solvents in different ways. To have one group of people be responsible for training for them is a little bit out of the bounds, but that bill's has not been heard, and right now it's not going to be heard this year. So right now, again, there's nothing in this dealing with solvents in the bill. So I mean, I would say vote no on this amendment is not necessary. It's not part of the bill.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I was glad to hear Representative Nelson mention that. I remember having a lot of friends that couldn't get a down payment on a home, so they did sweat equity to qualify for the loan. And this type of action and other things that they were able to do, I hear discussion of preventing them, and I'm glad to hear that the chair of the committee says that there won't be any of this coming this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Nelson. I so appreciate your position on this. This is fantastic. I'm so glad that you've taken a position that you didn't even allow for this bill to be heard in the Labor Committee this year. And yet the concern, like Representative Mecklin mentioned, has been just vast, very vast. Like I've heard about this a ton across the state of Minnesota since that bill was introduced. And thus, Mr. Chairman, I'm just asking for us to adopt this language so that you can have a really strong House position in case the other body has some other desire in mind, especially considering the author of that over in the other body. It would be great for us to take a really strong House position on this at this time. Frankly, I don't think it would hurt any one of us here in this body to take that vote, and it's a wise move for us to take as the House, to take a really strong position that we don't think that you need to have a license in order to do some painting around your home. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, what this amendment is doing is taking them out of contractors that need to be licensed to do work. And we have a bill that we heard today in conference or in committee dealing with pool contractors and requiring them to be licensed, because when you're licensed, you pay into the contractor recovery fund that's there, and that if somebody doesn't do the work or improper work, or they stiff you and don't do the work, if we were to remove painters from this section of law, they would not have, painting contractors would not be paying into would not be licensed, number one, and number two, and this is talking about painting contractors, number two, if you contracted a painter to do work on your house and they stiffed you, conned you out and didn't do the work, you wouldn't be able to recover from the contract recovery fund. So members, this is not a good amendment. I don't think it's going to do what you want it to do. Again, the bill that was brought forward was put into the hopper and was not heard. There's a lot of work that has to be done on that, and there is some sense to what the painters are trying to do with it as far as getting training for people that work with solvents. But the way the bill was structured, it needs a lot of work, and that's why we did not hear it. So members, I would request a no vote on the 810 amendment.
Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for clarification, Chair Nelson, I don't know a whole lot of painters that pay into the recovery fund. Typically, it's the general that does that, and then the painter works for the general, just for a clarification point. But, you know, after last year, we had several ridiculous bills, so that was why I felt this was kind of important, because you never know what might slip through. But since I have your commitment and your word that you will not allow this ridiculous bill to be heard, I will formally withdraw.
The amendment has been withdrawn. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schultz moves to amend Senate File Number 3852. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A5.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. When we're looking at this bill, one of the major cruxes to this underlying bill that we're debating tonight are provisions that significantly, and I can't understate that enough, significantly change minimum wage standards in our state. And the reason this is important, members, is the majority here in this body, and that controls the complete trifecta here in St. Paul, has made Minnesota more expensive. More expensive through the $10 billion worth of new taxes, more expensive through over $72 billion worth of new spending, or worth of spending in the budget. And now we have something before us, and a bill before us that contains a change to the minimum wage standards in Minnesota that frankly is going to make your coffee more expensive, your hamburger more expensive, your vacation more expensive. And that's the change that's being pursued with the changes to the minimum wage standards contained inside this labor bill. And so I have an amendment today. The A5 amendment is one to strip out the provisions that take us away from the current common sense practice that allows us to employ Minnesotans and get them their earliest training, their first training as young adults, and to earn that training and that next standard. Because we know in Minnesota right now, we are in a workforce crisis, and employers are looking for more qualified employees for jobs across the spectrum. And at the same time, as we're preparing the next generation of workers, they need to have the opportunity to get a job while they don't yet have the skills for a majority of those early years. And so that's why it's important that we strip out the minimum wage provisions that are currently inside this bill and return to what is currently in state law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just so members know, currently the state's minimum wage is $10.85 an hour, but there are exemptions for small businesses, employees under 18, and then workers on J visas working at hotels, motels, and resorts. And that minimum wage is at $8.85 per hour, which is a $2 difference. So when this bill was being put together, the Department of Labor and Industry, or DOLI, had many conversations with employer organizations, which include chambers across Minnesota, Hospitality Minnesota, to build an understanding of whether and how employers were using these lower minimum wages. And the feedback was clear that actually hardly any employers are making use of the lower minimum wages. And so this lower minimum wage is outdated for Minnesotans. Critically, this bill does not remove the training wage, which allows employers to pay those employees who are under 20 during their first 90 days of employment. So when these employees, these new employees that Representative Schultz was talking about, are undergoing training, they are being able to pay less, but then when they're doing the work that they're being required to do, they need to be making that minimum wage. We have to find a balance for what it means to make Minnesota a place where people can thrive and not just scrape by. A full-time minimum wage, much less this lower minimum wage, earners cannot even afford a one-bedroom apartment in any of Minnesota's 87 counties. And that's not just Minnesotans, but the lowest paid workers in our state are being left behind. And we're okay that by adopting this amendment, we're saying that it's okay for some workers to make poverty wages. So members, please vote red.
We will add member from Sherburne, Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Jordan yield for a question?
She will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In that provision for the 90 days, that if I'm correct from reading that in committee, that is 90 days for the new trainee. That's 90 days from the date they start. Is that correct, Representative Jordan?
Representative Jordan.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mecklen, that is my understanding as well.
Representative Mecklen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Jordan. The reason I bring this up is if my daughter, for example, works at a very small local business and she works 1 day a month, how long will it take her to get fully trained in? And if there's very, very few individuals that are actually fall into this bracket, there's likely a reason. And this is not about 48-room apartment because I haven't kicked my daughter out yet. In fact, I was just told I got to pay for a dorm. So I would please hope you would support Representative Schultz' amendment. Thank you.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the dialogue on this. This is just critically important, right? This is literally, these are the decisions that are made that impact how much it costs for you at the gas pump. These are the things when you visit the convenience store and you're buying the sharing size of peanut M&Ms. This is literally the decision right here that determines what that's going to cost. And frankly, under the current makeup, whether in DC or here in St. Paul, what we have seen is prices continue to rise for Minnesota families. They continue to rise. The costs continue to rise for businesses seeking to operate in our state. In the largest city that I represent, just after this year, the mainstay restaurant of the community of 2,900 people closed because of two heavy-handed mandates passed by this legislature. And the mandates and bills like this one that result in people losing jobs, losing the opportunity to work, losing the opportunity to gain the experiences that they need. So to the members of this body, that's the decision that we have. So when people aren't able to work at the mainstay Main Street restaurant in Malacca, they're also not able to provide the community service of having a nice family restaurant in town. One-size-fits-all approaches like this underlying language on the minimum wage does, it doesn't take into account the voices of every place, every location, every city in the state. It's different in International Falls than it is in downtown Minneapolis. It's different in Malacca than it is from Marshall. And it's important that we recognize the needs of businesses in the community where they're at. And that's why, members, there are small businesses across the state who probably reached out to each and every one of us with concern for the minimum wage standards that are currently in the underlying bill, which are what I am seeking to take out. The Main Street small businesses in my own hometown reached out to me, especially concerned when they saw what happened in the other body over this exact language. Because frankly, it's the public service of my community for the small businesses to hire the young workers who don't have skills yet. And I'm proud of the work that they get to do in settings like that so that they can go on to bigger and greater things. But if we eliminate that first tier of employment and that opportunity that they have while in high school, it's going to have a detrimental impact to our economy as a whole, whether it's for each and every one of us, and the people across the state of Minnesota who are going to be paying more money to buy a slice of pizza, or whether it is any other circumstance. We, as a legislative body, need to be focused upon making life more affordable for people. If we in this body truly care about people, what should have happened was that this body should have taken a vote to deliver $2,000 rebate checks to taxpayers across this state. That's what should have happened. But instead, now we're pricing Minnesotans out of our state. We're closing businesses because of actions just like the minimum wage standards found within this underlying bill. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. 15 hands. A roll call is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is critically important. This is critically important. We cannot continue down a path of one-size-fits-all mandates for every community across this state that strip away the opportunities for our youngest workers and add to the cost of families when they want to take a vacation to the North Woods. Vote green on this amendment. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk call the member who is voting remotely?
Daniels.
Daniels votes yea.
Daniels votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 68 nays, the amendment does not prevail. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Selesnikar moves to amend Senate File Number 3852. The second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A8.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Selesnikar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I'm going to talk a little bit about this restrictive covenant. Last session, we passed a bill that was on the non-compete that was really about the employer-employee relationship. And this bill, however, is changing the language. It's really about the customer and the employer. And so what that could look like is you could have somebody that really likes the teacher that their kid has at the child care center and wants to offer them to be a nanny. My concern with this bill is serving on children and families, serving on workforce, health and human service finance. Without child care providers, we're just not going to have the ability to grow our workforce. And I'm very concerned about this. And there's been numerous articles in the paper in every community on child care. And even CBS did a big article at the end of 2023 saying that millions, I think it was 316 million, that we put into child care. And so we have a CDA, a child associate program that they can go through. We have multiple programs where we're paying through taxpayer money, helping child care as we intended. And so my concern is that this is just going to further strap child care centers and further implode the ability for families to work. We already have 50% of the family child cares that we've lost in less than a 2-year period. So this is real. And the centers aren't doing much better. I've had centers reach out to me in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in all the suburbs that are very concerned about this. There's probably higher incomes in this area than there is where I live, where that could happen with nannies. So I think it's a very valid thing for members to be aware of. I don't need childcare anymore, but I did use it, and I know that the families in my district and in this entire state, and those that are wanting to have children, it matters to them. So members, I urge you to vote green on this. We need to make sure we protect childcare, and that's what my amendment offers. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Greenman moves to amend the Selesnikar amendment to Senate File Number 3852. Second engrossment as amended. Amendment is coded A13.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this secondary amendment does is acknowledge that we have a crisis in childcare. but we're not going to solve it by excluding childcare workers from the worker protections that we give other workers. This underlying bill, what it does is it closes a loophole that we left last year about no poach agreements. This Representative Zalesnikar's right. This is not about contracts between two consenting parties. This is about a contract between a service provider and a customer about a worker who is not even a party to that contract. It is done above their head and without their consent. So what this underlying bill does is say that you can't limit the protections for, you can't limit the opportunities for workers in a contract that is done without their consent and above their head. What this amendment to the amendment does is strike the part that would actually take child care workers out of the protections we're giving other workers. But it leaves the legislative findings piece and just includes, make sure we're talking about both workers and providers, because what we know is that we don't just have a provider crisis, we have a worker crisis, and one of the reasons is because people are paid very low wages and they're competing with folks like Target and Quick Trip is what I hear. So with that, members, I'd ask you to vote green on this secondary amendment.
Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I'd ask for a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Members, this bill is going to strip everything that I asked for. And what this is going to do is create the opportunity for the child care center to train the next nanny. I don't think that's what we want in Minnesota. I don't think that's what we want. I don't think that's what Minnesotans expect. This isn't about protecting the worker. This is about not having the customer, which is me, the parent, who has my child at the center, to say, you know what? We had an agreement, and that's not going to happen. But now you're going to be able to have them come be a nanny. That's what this bill is all about. We cannot afford to have our child care centers train the future nanny for whoever it is. That's not a good plan for Minnesota, and it's going to further erode our child care centers. We have a triangle here that's in jeopardy. We have just increased the voluntary pre-K program for Minnesota, the school-based program, but we got centers. The two other edges of this triangle are imploding. Just ask your constituents back in your district. You probably are going to find out you have no family child care, for all the people working shift work, for all the people working weekends, for all the people that can't work remote, and now the centers are going to be in jeopardy, the freestanding centers. This is going to implode childcare in Minnesota. So members, I urge you to vote no.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was listening closely to the debate, and as I was writing my own notes, I was surprised to realize that I'm going to give the exact same speech that Representative Greenman gave. And that is that in this amendment to the amendment, we're deleting the language that solves the problem, but we're leaving the language that acknowledges the significance of the problem. Imagine my surprise when she gave my speech, which was really, really odd. The difference, though, is that then she brought in something. She said, people are paid low wages, and they're being poached by places like Target and Quick Trip. But that's not what we're addressing here. We're not addressing people just switching jobs and getting a new job at Target or Quick Trip. That's not what we're addressing here. These restrictive covenants are a problem. We have a crisis in childcare, and I do appreciate that the majority is at least willing to acknowledge the crisis. But Representative Zalesnikar actually has an amendment that helps us at least take care of a tiny little piece of this. And the majority is saying, yeah, we get the problem, but we're not going to solve it. That we're not going to do. We're not going to solve it. I'm a little blown away and surprised. This is an easy no vote on the amendment to the amendment. If we're going to acknowledge a problem, we should probably try to have a solution. So thank you, Representative Zalesnikar, for having a solution.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I really appreciate, as I know many do, the acknowledgement that there is, in fact, a crisis in childcare and early learning, because, of course, that's what it is, right? It's both the care of kids when their parents are working, but also the development as well. And so that is great. And I also appreciate the acknowledgement that that crisis really matters. It does so for the development of kids, but as Representative Zalesnikar said, this is the workforce behind the workforce. This is critical that we provide support to the folks doing this work. But members, that crisis cannot be solved. It can't be addressed on the backs of the workers, of the educators themselves, of the folks who are being paid very, very little. I think it's like 15% of the people doing this work get benefits, get health or any kind of benefits. I think about a third experience food insecurity. The pay is incredibly low. It is true that your first day on the job at the Quick Trip or the Target is actually going to be a higher pay than if you've been doing this work for a number of years. And of course, this is set up so that there is, reimbursement if the employer is paid for training, education, that kind of thing. But the idea that a restrictive covenant might have, when this is first created, you think of something for like some high-paid doctor executive. This is somebody who is doing their best to serve their community by doing this work. And why would we solve the crisis on the back of those workers? Instead, members, we have, in the majority, another approach. We have acknowledged the crisis and have taken action. Last year, we not only invested quite a bit in this sector for low-income families, for those providers, but helped to lift those incredibly low wages through Great Start compensation supports. But members, going after the workers and the educators doing this work to prevent them from doing what they need to do, to my mind, that makes absolutely no sense. The economics of the sector don't work. We need to be addressing that. Let's not do that by punishing workers. Let's give them the same right that other workers have as well. And then let's make sure that we lift up this full sector and recognize how important it is. So I would urge a yes vote on the amendment to the amendment. And let's acknowledge the crisis. Let's give the workers the empowerment that they have. And let's continue the investments we made last year and continue on in lifting up this sector and recognizing it as the public good that deserves public support that it is. Thank you, Speaker.
The clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. The clerk will call the name of the member who has not yet voted.
Daniels.
Daniels votes no.
Daniels votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 61 nays, the amendment to the amendment is adopted. Now to the underlying amendment as amended. Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm disappointed. You can tell this is a big issue in Minnesota because the vote was actually close. And it should be close because we spent $316 million, I believe, last year to try to ramp up and support these workers. And if these programs were working so great, we wouldn't be at further risk of nannies poaching the employees from the centers. And I'll guarantee you that we're all going to hear about this. And we're going to see on the statistics at Children and Family that we have more closures, less family child care, and it's going to continue on the trajectory Minnesota's on. And while I'm extremely disappointed, I can tell you Minnesotans are watching and they care about child care. whether they're grandparents, whether they are my age, hoping to be grandparents, or they actually are looking to find childcare. So we should be doing better. It didn't turn out the way I want, and I will be withdrawing my amendment. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk. Oh. The amendment is withdrawn. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
New Brindley moves to amend Senate File Number 3852, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A9.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, members, last year, the Democrats created a nursing home standards board that has been working through its process. The problem is we're starting to see some things materializing that are likely going to add significant costs to long-term care in the state of Minnesota. And so what my amendment does is it simply says that if the board votes to adopt a rule or policy that's going to increase the cost for our nursing homes, that has to be submitted to the legislature, and we have to approve or deny that. We have to accept that, and we have to appropriate funding for that. And I want to talk to you about why this is so important. You know, our nursing homes have been in crisis. We have lost a lot of our nursing homes across the state of Minnesota. We talked about this a lot last year when it was a budget year and we could actually do something about it. But not only have we had nursing homes close, we've had nursing home beds close, the equivalent to dozens of additional nursing homes. It's a crisis in the state of Minnesota. And last year, Democrats were dragged kicking and screaming to do something about it. And we finally, in the end, convinced them that it was important enough in the 11th hour of negotiations that we needed to do something for our nursing homes. However, now we're going backwards. We're going backwards because if we allow this unelected board to put in place policies that increase these costs, we are back to square one. We are back to square one. And Democrats, you continue to make Minnesota more expensive for families, which is exactly why we need to make sure that if the Nursing Home Standards Board proposes action that's going to increase the costs, we as a legislature should have the final say on that. And there are two ways, essentially, that the costs of nursing homes are paid for in this state. One is private pay, and we are going to directly increase the cost to families. And not just families, to our senior citizens, if we don't take care of this problem now. We are going to allow an unelected board to directly increase the cost of living, of health care on our senior citizens. The other piece of this is that the state pays for this care through Medicaid. And that means if we allow this unelected board to pass mandates without coming back to the legislature, we are literally allowing this unelected board to appropriate money. This is general fund spending that we are giving away the authority to appropriate to an unelected board. And we all know the costs of Medicaid in this state are out of control. And the underlying, the problem we have with the legislation that was passed last year is that we have given the authority to someone else to increase those costs without our explicit consent. This is a huge problem, members. It seems like a no-brainer. There is no cost to this bill. There is no cost to the legislature. There's no cost to the department. There's no general fund cost whatsoever to adopt this amendment. But this provides a great deal of oversight and protection to our senior citizens and to the taxpayers of the state. And I would ask for a yes vote.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Agbaje moves to amend the New Brindley Amendment to Senate File 3852, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A14.
The author of the amendment to the amendment from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this amendment to the amendment, it's because that there's already a provision in the state statute for the underlying amendment. In fact, the legislature is already pulled into the work of the Nursing Home Workforce Standards Board in statute. It already lists in statute, I can list a couple of citations, Minnesota Statute 181.213, Subdivision 2, both in paragraph C and E, talk about how if the board makes a rule for standards that go beyond the forecasted costs that are already clearly defined in statute, then they have to seek approval from the legislature. So that is already defined in statute. So the underlying amendment is, as introduced, is asking for something that already exists. What the secondary amendment instead does is it makes the report a notification to the legislature about the board's work. And that would fulfill the purpose of keeping the legislature engaged in the board's work to see that whenever these notifications happen, that we understand what types of policies, what types of standards, what types of rules that the board is adopting. As long as those stay under the forecasted cost, the board is able to do its work. As I said before, it is only when they go above the forecasted costs that they need to come back to the legislature. And so I would encourage a green vote on this amendment so that way the Nursing Home Workforce Standards Board could continue the work that they've begun and keep up with ensuring that our workers are well cared for and protected. Thank you.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Agbaje yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm trying to look up this language quickly, and I'm wondering if you can repeat the reference, 181.213, and specifically which paragraphs?
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The paragraphs, I can also read them into the record, are Subdivision 2, paragraph C and E. In both of them, wherever the board is considering wage and benefit increases, the board must determine the impact on the operating payment rates pursuant to another section in statute. So both of those paragraphs talk about that if those costs that the board is considering exceed those forecasted numbers, then they do have to come back to the legislature to seek approval to move beyond those forecasted numbers.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to look at these, and I will come back in a minute.
The member from Asante, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, Representative Agbaje, you know, I'm concerned about this amendment. We have a responsibility to the citizens of Minnesota, and we've given up that responsibility to the governor's office. We no longer approve rules. We write a bill, and the executive branch gets to do whatever they want with the bill and how they write the rules. We have no say over those rules unless both bodies say no. We don't approve them. We can only say, we can only reject them. That's not how this works. We have a responsibility to the citizens of Minnesota. We have 3 different branches of this government. This body is the one who writes the laws, and that includes the rules. We should approve the rules. Not the executive branch or the governor's office. The judges interpret the laws we make. They don't make laws. It is our responsibility to make sure that the rules match what we plan to do and the laws that we wrote. Not the governor's office, not the executive branch, not the commissioners. They answer to us. Unfortunately, many years ago, we gave that authority away. It's time to bring it back. This is a start. We need to make sure that what we are doing is responsible to the citizens of this state. Please vote against the Abaje amendment.
The member for Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Agbaje, I appreciate your citation because it's given us the chance to actually cite exactly what is in law. Fortunately, I had Section 181 already open, so it made it pretty easy for me to get to Subdivision 2, like you mentioned there. And what I find is actually the verbiage exactly in C and D to be in line with your amendment, which means we're missing entirely the point of Representative New Brindley's amendment. The point is, based upon the language in C and D, there is nothing that says that it comes back to the legislature to be approved or rejected. It simply says within C and D, as you referenced, that it's notification to the legislature, which is what your amendment does, meaning that your amendment, frankly, is already covered under law, and it's Representative New Brindley's amendment that really needs to be adopted. Because why? Because when there are additional changes made that result in additional costs, that those decisions should be brought right back here for approval of the legislature. And so it's really important that we correct the record on what is exactly in law in C and D, as referenced by Representative Agbaje.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And thanks, Representative New Brindley and Representative Schultz. You're exactly right. When the costs to nursing homes go up, they're paid for by two ways, either by the private pay folks or by the state through Medicaid. And those costs keep going up. In the amendment to the amendment simply says to notify the legislature, whereas the New Brindley amendment says the funding will be covered by the legislature. A huge difference there. So the New Brindley amendment goes further the extra step and actually covers the cost of the increased cost to the nursing homes. And one final little note, up until I think February of this year, the Department of Health paid for the background checks that folks who work there and people on the boards of directors of nursing homes had to go through, fingerprinting, that type of thing. Well, after February 1st, the Department of, I believe the Department of Health said, we're not going to pay for that anymore, despite the fact I think still were getting some funding for it. And it's a $40 charge and then a $15 fee to have it sent into the state or whatever. But now that cost is up to either the individual or to the nursing homes themselves. So again, I strongly support the amendment. Vote green on the New Brindley amendment.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would ask members to vote no on the Abaje amendment and to support what Representative New Brindley is saying. Her point is well taken. And this nursing home standards board that's been created cannot be the vehicle that makes these type of decisions. It needs to be this body right here. And why is that? This is the body that manages the money. We can't be the body that just creates the mandates, but doesn't tie the money to the mandates. There's been many examples of that in this last session. Whether it's schools, whether it's nursing homes, whether it's assisted livings, whether it's childcare, if the money's not going to follow it or the idea, then it makes no sense. It's simply an idea. And we all have a lot of great ideas, but if there's not going to be money, we're wasting our time and we're chasing our tail. I'll give you some examples back from COVID. because I said it last year and I'm going to say it again. Nursing homes were fined $1 million. Why? Because the surveyors from the Minnesota Department of Health surveyed our nursing homes and found violations. Is anybody surprised nobody's paying attention? But I'll tell you why your grandma didn't get toileted on time. Because, shocker, they didn't have any staff. They didn't have any staff. And who set the rules that would possibly mean somebody wasn't there? It wasn't the provider. It wasn't the nursing home. They followed the rules that were set by this body, by the Senate, by the governor, and they followed it through the whole entire 2.5-year period. They didn't determine when we sent somebody home for 14 days, 10 days, 7 days, 5 days, and then they got a note saying, have them come to work even if they're COVID positive. It changed a lot of times, and I understand that because it was a pandemic. What I don't understand is how we would agree to fine the nursing homes $1 million when we're in a pandemic. And I wrote a bill to get that right, to right a wrong, but it was never heard. Because somehow it made sense to fine the nursing homes $1 million and fine the assisted livings $3 million. And then everybody's shocked. Shocker alert, they don't have any money. So we create a nursing home standards board as if the providers don't know how to run the facilities. They do. There is no governance board that's going to be able to determine that. And it absolutely needs to come back to this body on anything that ties to the money. Even when we heard the House file tonight, 4993, on a policy bill for funding this, I voted no, not on the principle. Of course we're going to fund the facilities. The issue is we're not getting the data that we need. We can't be off by $500 million on a forecast. That's just not acceptable. We can't be off on that. We as legislators need to get updates. We should have had updates on the $1 million fines. It shouldn't have taken me to request what were the fines. That should come back to this body so that we can vote as a body to make sure we're making informed decisions. Members, this is very important, and it needs to come to this body to make decisions to fund anything that has to do with standards from this nursing home board. I urge you to vote no on the Abaje amendment and yes for the New Brindley. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Abaje.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just actually want to correct one thing before the vote happens, or, well, multiple things actually. So the actual citations are in 181.213, paragraph C. Also, paragraph D3 and paragraph E. Paragraph D3 talks specifically about how if the board determines that they need rate increases, they must come to the legislature to seek a sufficient appropriation. Same under paragraph E. Any new standards actually cannot be implemented if they go above the forecasted costs, and they must receive appropriation from the legislature. So we still have the opportunity to say yes or no to many of what the board decides. So I just want to make sure that that's clear on the record before I'm encouraging the body to vote green on this amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Typically, we would not call on anybody else, but I remember Representative New Brindley, you did say you wanted us to come back to you. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. And actually, what was just said is key. That the current statute would require the Standards Board to come back to the legislature for much of what the board decides. And that's exactly my problem. And I appreciate having a few minutes to actually look at the statute, because I was able to read this, and it very specifically applies to employee benefits and wages. The problem is the Nursing Home Standards Board is talking about a lot of other things that will increase costs to our nursing homes. And the legislature should also appropriate money for that. So that's great that the current statute ensures that the legislature is appropriating money for wages and benefits. But we also need to make sure that we are appropriating money, that we are the ones appropriating money for staffing ratios, for worker conditions. Those are things that the legislature should appropriate money for, all of it, not just a piece of it, all of it. We should vote no on the Agbaje amendment, and I would ask for a roll call, Madam Speaker.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. Will the clerk call the name of the member voting remotely?
Daniels.
Daniels votes no.
Daniels votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 62 nays, the motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. Back to the underlying amendment as amended. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the Democrats have once again managed to gut an amendment and made it meaningless, so I see no reason to bother with a vote, and I would withdraw the amendment.
The amendment is withdrawn. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schultz moves to amend Senate File Number 3852, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A7.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the A7 amendment is an important one, especially as we're considering labor policy in Minnesota. This amendment provides a prohibition to ensure that employers are not employing people who are here in Minnesota illegally. Something quite simple, something quite basic, and something quite important to the people of Minnesota, especially when we consider that Minnesota has become a top destination for people to cross the border illegally, come to our state, benefit from our public services because of the DFL majority in Minnesota. It is important that we take this and make this mark in the sand that say that employers across the state should not be employing people and that they would be prohibited from hiring people who are here in this state illegally. That is the A7 amendment, and I encourage support. Thank you.
Madam Speaker,
For what purpose do you rise?
I rise to a point of order under House Rule 4.05.
State your point of order.
Madam Speaker, under House Rule 4.05, an amendment to a bill that has received its second reading is being considered by the House is out of order if that amendment would increase the spending or spending base, and there is no spending in this bill. And the A7 amendment would increase spending. We had a similar bill that we passed last year off the House floor, House File 23, which has a fiscal note here that shows a cost. And so you even actually have shall language, which would require the Department of Labor and Industry to investigate. And the bill, House File 23, had a may, so it was less prescriptive and had a fiscal cost. So with that, Madam Speaker, I hope you find my point of order well taken.
Advice from the body, Representative Schultz.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and would certainly be very interested to hear more from the chair of the Ways and Means Committee as to exactly the cost that would be incurred by this amendment. Would she yield?
She will yield, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can you reiterate for the body what the costs would be that would be incurred under this amendment?
Member from St. Louis, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't believe your amendment was submitted at any point as a bill, so we don't have the direct cost of it. But we do have a similar bill, but it had actually more of a, as I mentioned, it had a shall language or may language, and yours has shall. And that showed that there was a $360,000 one-time cost and then $160,000 ongoing. And DLI said when looking at this amendment that they would likely anticipate that the cost of this amendment would be greater than what we saw in House File 23.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I find this very interesting. And by the way, for the record, for Minnesotans listening at home, if you would like to see the language, you can find the amendment online. In addition, for you, Representative Olson, I do have the language introduced as a bill. You can find the language of this underlying amendment found in House File 4321, a bill that I introduced on, it looks like, February 26th of this year. So I certainly find it interesting, and I think it's important for the people of Minnesota, and I'm so eager to find out the cost of people who are here in Minnesota illegally and to find out exactly what the cost is to state government. And I'm especially interested to find out what it would cost the Department of Labor and Industry to ensure that people who are here illegally are not being employed in this state, to ensure that we're in accordance with federal law. I would certainly be very interested to learn that. And so would Chair Olson yield to another question?
She will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Chair Olson, could you help the body out with what's found in House File 23 that you continue to reference?
Representative Schultz. Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm referencing the part of your amendment, which as a bill, and if you have a fiscal note for it that shows no cost, certainly run it over to my desk and I'll take a look. I'm referencing the part in the investigations where you have similar language to House File 23, which, and again, I would like to say that in that you're having the commissioner shall investigate possible violations. That is the part I am referencing in your amendment. Where in House File 23 it had the may investigate, so it's DLI investigations that would have a cost.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess with that, we might be headed for an additional conversation later this session. And yet, I think that if the Department of Labor and Industry is listening, and if we can work on finding exactly that fiscal cost, I think Minnesotans would be very interested in that.
Further advice, the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and frankly, I'm surprised. I thought that we actually obeyed federal employment laws, and that our departments actually made sure that we complied with federal law. My advice is that there should not be a cost because we actually should have our departments abiding by federal law. And so I'd be shocked if they aren't already doing that. I believe that our hardworking employees and departments actually abide by federal law. Therefore, that would mean there would be no additional cost because they're already doing this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm ready to rule, and I rule that the point of order is well taken.
Madam Speaker, I move to appeal the ruling of the Speaker, and I request a roll call.
Representative Schultz moves to appeal the ruling of the Speaker, and I see 15 hands. There will be a roll call. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member who has not yet voted.
Daniels.
Daniels votes no.
Daniels votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 64 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand.
You sure, did they pull another one I don't know about?
There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading as amended.
Third reading, Senate File Number 3852, as amended.
Third reading. The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to be, everyone will be thrilled to know that I'm going to be brief. But I just have to put a finer point on this Representative Zalesnikar's amendment and what she tried to do for our child care. What we were told is that the Democrats already solved the problem. They put hundreds of millions of dollars into this last session, and they solved the problem. But guess what, folks? If you solved the problem, wealthy elitists couldn't poach daycare workers to be their private nannies. So you didn't solve the problem. But you did have an opportunity tonight to at least make a dent, and you chose not to do it. And that's really unfortunate. This is a really easy bill tonight to vote against. You had a lot of opportunities to protect Minnesotans, to protect Minnesota families, against a more expensive Minnesota. You had a chance, and you didn't do it. And you've made it really easy to vote no on this bill tonight, and that is certainly what I will be doing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Traverse, Representative Becker.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, for us representatives that are border districts, we are seeing workers leaving Minnesota. If you look on the western part, going from Canada down to Iowa, unfortunately, no longer do we have a larger community on the Minnesota side, and that, members, is troubling. When we export our greatest resources, because Minnesota is unaffordable, that's what this bill helps to do, is make it more expensive to enjoy, to work, to have fun in Minnesota. And it also makes it more expensive, unaffordable for job creators to create jobs. This is why East Grand Forks is smaller than Grand Forks. This is why Moorhead is smaller than Fargo, Browns Valley to Sisseton. We look at Breckenridge to Wahpeton. You'll go down South Dakota and you look from Watertown, there's really nothing on the Minnesota side, maybe Marietta, and that's really far in. We get down to Brookings, we look at Pipestone, and then we have Sioux Falls. And this is what's troubling, is again, our majority leader, our majority party, which also wasted money, $730 million for a palace for politicians, is doing the same thing in this bill, and it's making it expensive for good Minnesotans to live here and build a family and to have fun and enjoy our lakes. So I would ask members to vote no. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I wanted to address specifically the misguided service contract provision in the bill. Representative Greenman said that this was presented this as just closing a loophole or continuing the next step in the ban on non-competes from last term. The fact of the matter is, though, it attacks a fundamentally different type of business model, and it really takes important types of business models
and puts them into jeopardy. And in particular, think about, we talked some about the child care industry or a child care situation where a child care provider is hiring workers and then introducing them to parents. But this happens in the same way, or in a similar way, when we're talking about temp agencies, or we're talking about other kinds of service contractors, technology contractors, for example. And what you have to think about is how these arrangements actually happen. So a child care worker or a potential nanny who could be just hired by a family, they could just be hired by a family. A family could put out a help wanted ad and go find their nanny. Those wealthy elitists that Representative Brindley was talking about, they could just put out a help wanted ad and find a nanny, or a company that's looking for temporary help. If they wanted to, they could just hire somebody. They could put out a help wanted ad and hire somebody, or a accounting firm or a technology company could just hire a programmer if they were willing to do it. But what the service providers do is they provide a bridge for the family that isn't ready to hire a nanny, or the technology company that isn't ready to hire a programmer, or any company that's not willing yet to hire a permanent employee and it doesn't go out there and do it. So what the temp agency or the contractor or the child care provider does is they provide an introduction and they provide a bridge. And that is a service to both the worker and to the customer, the other company that's buying that service in the meantime. The way that business model works now, before the majority's bill breaks it, the way that business model works now is that the customer, the company buying the work, or the parents who are buying the child care in the meantime, is paying for it. They understand that if they choose to hire that worker in the future, they have to pay the service provider for the value that the service provider provided to both the worker and to the customer. That's how the business model works, and it's good for everybody in a lot of circumstances. But that's not good enough for the Democrats. They want to break it. And that's what this bill does, is it just takes that entire business model and says, we don't care if that provides value to the worker and to the customer, and we don't care that the company in the middle providing that value gets compensated for that value. It's not going to be allowed anymore. And the wording in the bill is very, very broad. It says any kind of contract in which that company in the middle says, we get paid if you hire the person that we introduced you to, we have to get paid, that's broken. So it's just not reality. It's going to break a lot of, this is why a lot of the technology industry says this is a terrible idea, because it's harming the contract service providers that fuel technological development in our state. It's going to be terrible for the child care industry, as we've already discussed. It's going to put virtually every kind of temp agency that operates essentially as a headhunter that allows for some company to have an option to see whether a worker is any good before they then go on and decide to hire them permanently. All of those business models are going to be damaged by this bill. It's not a good idea. It's not well thought through. Vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I have spoken a lot on the floor today, and I wouldn't speak again except for I am really proud of this bill, because this bill continues the work that we've been working on in this DFL trifecta to ensure that we are centering workers and that we are investing in business models and in people that don't exploit workers, but actually lift them up as they lift up our economy. Everybody deserves fair wages, they deserve legal protections, they deserve workplace freedom, and they deserve to be paid for what they do. And what this bill is about is eliminating the exclusions, the carve-outs, and that are oftentimes focused and hurt our lowest paid, most vulnerable workers. This bill levels the playing field for our workers. It does that by ensuring that every Minnesotan gets paid a minimum wage of $10.85 an hour. Representative Kozlowski's bill eliminates the unfair carve-outs that keep young people, keep J-1 visa holders, and keep workers at small businesses stuck in an $8.80 minimum wage just because of who they are. I am very proud that we are taking that step to say everybody is on the same playing field. Representative Bonner's bill will help close wage gaps and eliminate disparities by ensuring that everybody has transparency and is on an even playing field. And my provision that eliminates these shadow non-competes, that are provisions that workers don't even know about. If you listen to our committee hearings, people talked about having to chase around the companies in order to just see these provisions that restricted their opportunities and that we know from research limit their job prospects, the opportunities for wage increases, career growth, and the FTC says $250 billion in income a year. We are going to eliminate that because last year we said we're eliminating non-competes to create a fairer workplace. This year we're going to close that loophole. Minnesota working families are being nickeled and dimed on their paycheck and at the cash register. And the issue isn't that these workers are making too much money. The issue isn't that $8.80 is somehow asking for $10.85 is crazy, or that's the issue with our economy. Corporate profits are up by 75%. And my friends across the aisle think it's because workers want to make a minimum wage of $8.85. That, as my friend Representative New Brindley would say, is bonkers. A more expensive Minnesota is because of the extra $3,000 they're paying in junk fees that we talked about earlier, the extra $3,516 because of greedflation. They are being nickeled and dimed by a corporate economy that is tilted against them. So the last thing I want to say is that we believe that there are business models that do not exploit workers. If a business model exploits workers and the best you can get is that we need to pay workers poverty wages, then we should be investing in different business models. We believe that there is a way to lift up small businesses, to lift up workers, to lift up communities, and that it is clear whose side we're on. I and this bill, our chair, who did an amazing job of putting this together, and the last 2 years have shown Minnesotans whose side we are on, which is the workers and the communities and the families that rely on good wages, decent freedom in their workplace, and are simply asking for a level playing field. Members, I'd ask you to vote yes.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There is some good things in this bill. Representative Wogemont had one for the contractors that do the wells. I think it does septics too, maybe, I'm not positive, but that totally made sense. Representative Berg had one for surgical smoke. I didn't even know that was a thing. It was interesting listening to all that. And in that case, it sounded like most of these facilities already have it. They just don't use it. So it wasn't like a huge thing. And Representative Moeller and the oral testing. Obviously, with the recent changes with legalization, it kind of also makes sense. Unfortunately, that's all the further I can go with the praise. It certainly could have been a lot worse. We heard about a bill that was far more ridiculous. Luckily didn't make it into this one. So, but I will say to Chair Nelson, I appreciate and give you my warmest appreciation for the gratitude and the latitude you've given us in the committee. You have always been very gracious with our time, and I really genuinely appreciate that. And I think for those that don't know, Chair Nelson and I kind of share a little bit of background together as far as being in the trade. So he can tell when my eyebrows go up that I'm thinking about something, and see he's smiling now. So nevertheless, unfortunately, I can't support this bill, which I'm sure you're all shocked by, but I guess there'll be another one next week probably. But Again, thank you, Chair Nelson, and for everybody. This committee has been actually pretty enjoyable, except for some of the ridiculousness. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I too would like to thank Chair Nelson and the members of the committee and the committee staff and everybody involved, including nonpartisan, for the discussion and debate that we continue to have during this legislative session. But as it relates to this bill, as has been echoed by plenty of our colleagues in this room, this bill is very heavy-handed to one side. This bill is the product of the Labor and Industry Committee. And yet I find that this bill, especially without the amendments adopted tonight, is a bill that is heavy-handed and doesn't take in the consideration of employers, of industry, and especially tonight, the concerns of communities across the state and the small businesses, the Main Street small businesses that will be so devastated by more mandates, by more heavy-handed mandates, one-size-fits-all mandates to the issues of the day here in Minnesota. But the result of one-size-fits-all mandates, irresponsible policy in Minnesota, is that it's going to be more and more unaffordable in our state, not just to do business, but more importantly, for the people of Minnesota, it's going to be more unaffordable in the products, goods, and services that they are seeking on a day in and day out basis. Because of this bill, we will see cost increases from gas to groceries in every corner of the state. And it's all because we couldn't have a little bit of humility. Because we couldn't balance the scales between labor and industry, but instead tilted the scales. That's what this bill is about. This bill does not take in the values and considerations that are going to enhance the entrepreneurial spirit in Minnesota, which is so incredibly important. We want Minnesota to be a hub of innovation and entrepreneurship. And yet the bill that is before us tonight is a bill that is irresponsible because of the heavy-handed mandates, the way that it tilts the scales, and ultimately because of the way that it will make Minnesota more unaffordable for Minnesota families. Vote no on this bill tonight. Thank you.
The author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. We've had a long discussion on this bill. Again, there's changes in here, a lot of technical changes. There's a few bills from members that were put in the bill, and I think it's a good bill, and I ask for your green vote.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is not yet voted?
Daniels.
Daniels votes no.
Daniels votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 61 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.